the Brahms Sonata is Opus 5. It's hardly the fifth work that Brahms wrote, but it's the fifth work he felt ready to present to the public. Here was a man who was really trying to come up with his voice and finally felt that he'd done it. How many of us can say we came up with our voice at age 20? I do think about Brahms at the keyboard, sitting and playing this, because of course he was a pianist and he was out to prove himself as a pianist just as much as a composer. And I think of the young man already very much taken with the wife of his mentor, Clara Schumann, living in their house. The second movement has a beautiful poem by Sternau about the twilight coming, the moonlight shining, and the two hearts beating together in love, entwined. And this is maybe something of what Brahms was feeling at the time, living in the same house with Clara Schumann and knowing that she was married to his mentor. Slightly tricky, complicated version of life. And here's where Brahms puts in his falling thirds motive. And this is the motive that recurs the rest of his life, maybe always having to do with love, who knows. And even after the death of Robert Schumann, no one really knows for sure whether Clara and Brahms ever had a romantic relationship. They were obviously very much enamored of each other, and they wrote letters continuously, but who knows whether this theme of love continued in Brahms's music for a reason. In the context of Western classical music, this particular sonata falls at a really important place. After Beethoven, everybody was trying to figure out, how do I go on? What do I do? For Brahms, that was a very difficult and long struggle. He was clearly haunted by some Beethovenian demons. The fourth movement of the sonata is actually called Rückblick, so a glance back. And it's a look back, in certain ways, at an earlier movement in the sonata. But in a much broader context, I think it's also a look back at Beethoven, because it includes this motive, which we often refer to as the sort of the fate motive, which is the rhythm from the Fifth Symphony, the ta-ta-ta-tam. Da-da-da-da. Slightly different rhythm than in Beethoven's Fifth, but everybody would have recognized what Brahms meant by that. Quietly, hauntingly, persistently, sort of mocking the composer who's trying to work his way and figure out what to do. People often debate about whether Brahms was sort of a historicist or a progressive. And I think from the very beginning he was both. He was very aware of where he came from and what his musical roots were, and he was already looking forward to what else could come. So Brahms takes this da-da-da-dum and he builds it up to a big fortissimo and just gets bigger and bigger, and he's clearly being haunted and attacked by this rhythm. And then he kind of dissolves into this crazy ninth chord, very jazzy, impressionistic sounding thing, which for 1853 would have just been shocking. I mean, it sounds like a little bit like he's suddenly gone to a whole tone scale or something that, you know, you would expect from Ravel. You can almost see the kaleidoscopes. You can almost see Chopin's influence and the future of Ravel and Debussy in just that little snippet. Brahms had already met one of the people who would become his lifelong friends, the violinist Joseph Joachim. One of the traditions in German-speaking places was to kind of pick your motto and use the initials of that motto in things that you do. Joachim's lifelong motto was frei aber einsam, so free but alone. And Brahms later changed that for himself and took as his motto frei aber froh, free but happy. And he took the F-A-F and would actually write music based on those pitches. There's F-A-E, and it sounds like this. Interestingly enough, in a sonata that's mostly full of blocks of sound, this is the most lyrical, most flowing, most expansive part of the piece. And in many ways, it's the culmination, because it's the last big theme to occur in the piece. And he's clearly taking something of someone he loves very much, someone he really admires, and incorporating it into himself. I think that it's very beautiful. In building up his finale, Brahms suddenly puts together a chorale that comes a little bit out of nowhere. And I find that even though this was written as a piano sonata, he wrote it with a lot of symphonic ideas in mind, but knowing full well that it's going to come out of the piano. And so what he's able to do is extract from the piano sounds almost as rich, almost as grand as a complete symphony orchestra. And I do think at the end of listening to the sonata, you'll feel like you've just listened to a major symphony. This piece is so huge that I really find that it's like an experience that you have to go through. It's a journey you have to undertake. I think whether you're playing it or listening to it, you're going to start in one place, and by the time you've gotten to the end, you will be completely transformed. I think that's what makes great art. You're never the same afterwards as you were before.